Hi, and welcome to another episode of Fish Whispering. In this episode, I thought I could explain a little bit more in depth about some of the flies that I use throughout the shows and explain a little bit of why they're tied a certain way and how I do a little bit of my own magic to them. Getting close. This is a good looking pool up ahead. Grab my net, be ready to go. Oh yeah, I think this pool will work. Perfect fly demo place. All right, so I've hiked a ways upstream here on the Bitterroot River system, and I found this beautiful little pool. It's kind of hitting hard into the river right-hand side of the bank, and I've got this little choppy inside eddy on this pool that I think will be a great spot to set up and test these flies out that we've just tied and see which one works best. So I'm gonna drop my gear here, get everything set up, and right after this, we'll be into Fish a Go-Go. So to start off with, we're gonna tie one of the most original, earliest, and effective patterns, the pheasant tail nymph. Okay, the original Sawyer pheasant tail nymph didn't even use thread, which is a common material that we use now. Some of our flies are just thread. Frank Sawyer actually just used copper wire. And Sawyer was a river keeper on the River Avon in the UK and was a very well-known nympher. So this is one of his favorite nymphs, and one that we've adopted, and we'll do some variations later. But I'm gonna tie as close as I can anyways, a variation, the Frank Sawyer variation, or of the original pheasant tail nymph. And to start it, you just start winding a little piece of copper wire onto the hook shank to start everything and to add weight to get the nymph to sink. And that was the biggest thing that he was concerned with, was sinking down to the bottom where most of the fish were hiding, especially the bigger ones. Okay, here we go. Let's just start the copper wire, just twist it around the shank there. That'll get it started. Great thing with wires, if you just kind of pinch it and twist it, you can break off the excess. And then I'm going to hold it there so it doesn't spin. Once I get it started though, it'll just hold for me. And then I can build up the thorax here, make it a little bit fatter, and that'll help add a shape to the bug itself. And it also anchors the copper wire to the hook shank. You see I have a really long length of wire. Alright, so there, that's mostly going to be our body with a thinner abdomen, thicker thorax. I'm going to bring it back just a little bit. Now I'm ready to add material to it. In the pheasant tail nymph, the main ingredient with, after the copper wire, is obviously the pheasant tail. So this is a tail off of a pheasant my father shot in South Dakota. He gets out there more than I do nowadays, but it's kind of cool. Harvested by my dad, South Dakota. And today I'm going to tie it onto a fly that soon we'll be catching fish on. Cut off just a few segments, 7 or 8 maybe. Just a decent little clump. The bigger the fly, the more material you're going to want. So this is about size 10 hook, but it's a short shanked hook, so I'll go with just about, it's probably about 7 or 8 strands. And then I double check, make sure all the tips of the material are lined up. And a good way to proportion your fly is to hold those pheasant tails right up to the shank and measure from behind the hook eye to where the bend starts on the hook, and then I can take that about as long as I want the tail. And I'm going to put that on the back, switch my hands around, and then secure it with just a turn or two of copper wire, just like that. And they're splayed out crazy, but that'll kind of imitate like a swimming mayfly pretty well. And then after this, we're kind of going to turn. We'll bring the copper wire up and then turn together the pheasant tail and the copper wire, and that helps add strength to the pheasant tail material as you wrap them together. Then once you get to the end of where you're going to turn it, secure it with a couple more turns of copper, grab your scissors, trim them off. And these pheasant tail feathers weren't super long, so I've got the body done. Ran out of pheasant tail, so now I'm going to come back though and do the wing case. So just a couple more turns of wire. And your wing case is going to come back about half the proportion. So that's about the halfway mark between the thorax and the abdomen and the thorax. Thorax up where the legs are. Grab a little bit more pheasant tail. I'm holding on to the wire just to keep tension. Clip about the same, 7 to 10, whatever. Just a good bunch of pheasant tail materials. And I like to tie in the butts. I'm not 100% certain how Frank Sawyer did it himself, but the butt part of these pheasant feathers is a little bit more durable and thicker. So I can just put the butt section in on top, secure it with some wire, and wrap that wire over top. And I'm just going to add more weight here. There we go. Now I'm right behind that hook eye. Pull the wing case over. Secure it with the wire. And now I want to make sure that this wire is placed just so. I'm going to cut those super close. Do just a couple more tight turns. This wire is going to gain memory and kind of hold itself to that hook as I wrap it. So once I'm certain I have a pretty good connection there, I'm just going to take it and twist it off. Just like a little twist tornado, pop it. And that's a pretty close copy of the original pheasant tail nymph as tied by Frank Sawyer, using the copper wire for weight, for shape. This thing is going to punch through the water and look just like a little emerging insect.
Alright, so I'm set up here in this beautiful pool. I'm thinking this inside bend just behind me is going to be a great start. I'm going to walk in softly, try not to spook anything, because this is relatively calm water. So the fish should actually be kind of spooky. And I'm going to, from past experience, I know this foam ant is a great one to go with. I'm going to have that as my point fly, or my first fly, at the end of my leader or tippet material. And I'm going to use that more or less as a bobber for the traditional Sawyer pheasant tail nymph. And it's got all that copper on there for weight. It should sink just the right amount I need it to get down to where the fish are going to be. So they may want to come up to the dry, they may want to stay down on that Sawyer pheasant tail, but we're going to find out right now. Big old floppy fish. line's getting in the way. Keeping that rod bent approximately in half. Yeah, another native, but on a different fly. So we have the same species of fish, but eating a different organism. A lot of fish are optimists anyways, and they're gonna eat a whole lot of different insects. They often will take advantage of anything they can. And in this case, you got the Sawyer pheasant tail. It's pretty cool, another pattern that's over 100 years old in its development, and it's still catching fish. In this case, on a 6-weight Montana Rodsmith's fiberglass rod prototype, and a Sawyer pheasant tail nymph tied more or less just like it was over 100 years ago. The Sawyer pheasant tail nymph still works. Doesn't even have any thread on it. What a killer fly.
So the Frank Sawyer pheasant tail works, but now we don't tie that pattern very often. There's a whole lot of pheasant tail variations out there. Some people give them unique names, but there's a whole lot of flies out there based on that basic fly. And this is one that I tie personally, especially in fly fishing tournaments, but personally I've just been doing really well with this pattern lately, and I've had a lot of guides on a lot of fish these last few weeks. And this is a pheasant tail variation I think you're really going to enjoy. So watch this. Alright, so this is a variation that I fish a ton, and I've been giving this one to a lot of clients lately while I've been guiding, and they've been doing very well with it, and it's one that I do very well on my own. Love this pheasant tail variation. Okay, so you can see this hook's a little different. It's got a straight shank, a big old hook gap here with a long point that helps hook and hold the fish by getting around the jaw, and then it's got this little neck where you can slide a bead up onto there, and this is a jig style hook. And that'll help, by putting the bead here, it'll help this with that little bend in the neck. It'll help ride that hook point up underneath the water and keep your hook from getting dull by bouncing into rocks and whatnot. So one modern addition, they had this a while back, it's not that modern, but it's thread. And you'll see I'm using a really bright thread, it's orange. Kind of makes a hot spot, it's a really good attractor color. Just tie that right back to the bend in the hook. And I'm going to use same material, pheasant tail, clip off probably about the same amount of fibers, 7 or 8. Again, your fly size is going to be dependent on it. The fatter the fly, the bigger the fly, the more fibers. Line up the tips, size up the tail, and right in there, the size of the hook shank length. Switch hands. Secure them, and this is kind of the tricky part. I'm using my index finger to try to keep the materials from twisting around the hook shank. And then you'll make a bump if you pull back right here, but that's okay because I'm going to make that up with my copper wire. But once I get those secured, I'll lift that all up into place, and I've got just a little bit of a bump there, no big deal. I can use my thread to kind of level it out, and this will help give me a nice straight body. Or I can even make it a little bit thicker up closer to where the wing case will be. And I'm going to level that all out with a little more copper wire. Copper wire that was used to secure everything. I'm just going to run it on the top of the hook shank here, which will be the bottom in the end when you fish it. But that'll help act as a keel to keep that hook point riding up. Add a little bit more weight, and it kind of evens out the design of that fly too. Right, now I'm going to move my thread halfway up, and that's where I'm going to end the abdomen. I'm just going to wrap all these materials around. Just hold them into place as I switch my hands while I wrap them, spacing them out evenly. Come to the bottom, and I'm going to tie it off here. Sometimes I tie off at the top, sometimes the bottom. Whatever's clever. And then I'm just going to wrap these up, and just to keep a little bit of bulk here, I'll cut these off just behind the bead. It'll also help hold the bead there. Oops, almost got all my hook fibers. Okay, now I'm going to wrap my wire up, and I'm going to segment my nymph body this way. This kind of adds a little segmentation to the fly. Let's say 4 or 5 wraps around the hook shank. 4, there's 5. I come around, I'm just going to tie that on top so I can see it a little better. Switching hands. 1 in front just because I like to do that to pack it in. A little tornado to snap that wire off. There's an errant pheasant tail here. I'm going to clip that off too. For looks, fish don't care. And now, one magical ingredient that Al Troth has been the one credited for putting on the first ones, but that's peacock herl. And peacock herl is basically the strands of feather off of the tail of a peacock. So this is a very reflective natural material that adds a lot of character to your fly. And on this fly, I'm going to clip off, let's say 3 or 4 strands of the pheasant tail. You can get this stuff from fishing stores, fly shops, or your local farmer. Even up the tips. And then I'm going to tie those in. And instead of using wire to secure all this, what I kind of like to do is get my material there, and then I like to wrap it around my thread just a couple of times, and then I'll bring that peacock herl down along the thread and wrap the thread and the peacock herl together. Try to twist them around so that thread's not exposed. And I just build up a nice fat abdomen there. Build up a nice fat thorax. Tie that off. And then clip it. Boom. And one more magic material. I'm going to use a little bit of this Twisted Crystal Flash, is the brand name on it. There's a lot of different flash materials out there. And I just add this for a little bit of an attractor. Nice flash. It's supposed to, people say it looks like the air bubbles coming up off of an emerging insect, but I think the fish just kind of get attracted by the flash. Bend it over on itself, tie it in the middle. Suck it up tight, and see, this is on the belly now, but when I'm done tying this, it's actually going to be on top and kind of be where the wing case would normally go. Trim that just for the length of the thorax. And now I'm going to build up just a little bit of a thread head. Whip finish it a couple of times. I scrape the heck out of the substrate when I'm fishing nymphs, so I like to double whip finish so that I have a very secure place. If one of those knots fails or gets cut while I'm fishing it, I'll have that second one as a backup and give me more time on the water. Double whip finish with that hot orange color. Cut it tight. And I've got this faceted tungsten bead on there for weight and for a little bit extra flash. So when this rides, it'll ride just like that, and it's gonna hook a whole lot of fish in just a second.
There we go. Swinging the wet fly through. Wet fly and a nymph, so let's find out right after this what kind of fly the fish took, if we get it in the first place. Here we go. Oh, it's a native. What I like to call silver trout. It's a much more elegant name for the Rocky Mountain whitefish. And it took that soft hackle partridge and orange. So I wasn't getting anything dead drift in that dry fly with a nymph below it. I couldn't believe it. But I was thinking, I don't know, let's try something with a little more action. Tied on the soft hackle, swung it through the riffle, and pulled out a fish. So we got one way of catching these fish right now, whitefish, but fish nonetheless. It's the partridge and orange fly, and it's working just like it has for over 100 years on streams throughout the Northwest and West.
Okay, so now we have one of the world's greatest nymphs, the pheasant tail nymph, tied up, ready to go, and we found that it works quite well. So now we're going to go to a floating fly, a dry fly, and one, it's not a super classic fly at all. This is actually kind of my own variation on an ant pattern. If you've been keeping track of fish whispering throughout the years, you've noticed that I often do well on a foam ant. And I like foam ants because they'll be able to hold a sinking nymph like pheasant tail below it. You have dry fly on the surface, nymph below, and you can get fish on either or. And oftentimes, especially in cutthroat water, you'll see cutthroat just come up and hammer a foam fly floating on the surface. The buoyancy and the look to them just looks great. So this fly, the foam ant, is just kind of a little creation I came up with, variation of a whole bunch of different patterns. I'm sure a lot of anglers have something similar, but this is mine. And the secret is, to this one, I have 2 layers of black foam. One of them's just normal foam, and on the back, I've got little sparkly bits plastered all over at the bottom of this black foam that I found at just a hobby store. Go look at your local hobby store. And I'm going to put that and show that to the fish on the bottom of this hook shank. So look closely as I tie up the foam ant.
Really just a little fella, but a brilliant little rainbow. Look at that guy. Probably only about 2.5 years old, but aggressively feeding on a huge foam ant pattern. What an amazing experience to tie some classic flies that have been around for over 100 years, like the Sawyer pheasant tail and the partridge in orange, and as well as try some more modern takes like a jig head pheasant tail and the big foam ant pattern. And they all worked. It took a little while to get something up onto the foam fly, but they all worked well. And did you notice that the trout came up and hit the big foam dry? And it is kind of a rule on some rivers where if you're picking them up on nymphs and just getting a bunch of whitefish, go ahead and throw on a big foam fly and generally your trout will come right up to the surface. So you can see there are several ways to catch fish. We learned how to tie a few classic flies and a few new ones. And we had an amazing time on this western river catching fish the old way and the new way.